Alright, let's get back to the craziness. So in the first part of this, I started reading an article that was published in the Royal Society Publishing back in 1893. And apparently a paper or a talk was given in 1892 to where geologists were discovering animal bones and other interesting geological strata about 1,000 feet plus all around Europe and the Mediterranean. And what they were finding is that this strata and all of these animal bones, they did not correlate to any known geological process that was currently accepted at the time to create said strata up that high. So what this guy did is he started studying this and he started correlating all of the data, not only from Europe, but also from the Mediterranean. And then he just started following the evidence. Now what the evidence led him to believe or to conclude was that at some point in time, not too long ago, just a few thousand years ago, if we follow the evidence, Europe and the Mediterranean at least must have been submerged under at least 1,000 feet of water. Now that is one hell of a claim to say that Europe only a few thousand years ago had been submerged under at least 1,000 feet of water. Yeah, that's insane. But it's only insane if you currently subscribe to all of the mainstream sciences that are out there. If you're following actual geological evidence, not just in that area, but all over the planet, this claim is not that weird. Now, the only reason why this stuff sounds weird is because right now in the mainstream, the only thing that is shoved down our throats Now, the only reason why any of this stuff sounds weird to your average person is because your average person is only paying attention to what supposed figures of authority are saying. Now, those same figures of authority are not looking at this kind of evidence. For example, everything in this article exists. I mean, it exists to this day. You can go to it physically if you want. Which then leaves us with the question, why are mainstream geologists ignoring this? Like, what's the point? I mean, if we have evidence that points to the truth, that's exactly where we should be looking and heading, right? Well, that's not what we get. Anytime the mainstream heads in the direction of some form of catastrophism, they instantly make a U-turn and they run away from it. Isn't that weird that catastrophism is like not allowed at all in any sense of the word in mainstream history or physics or anything else? What's even more interesting is that these same people, especially cosmologists, have no problem saying that the absolute most crazy catastrophic events happen out in the universe all the time, just never in our solar system. Or if geologists are forced to admit any kind of catastrophism, it always happens millions and billions of years ago. For whatever reason, right now we are magically immune to all sorts of all the stuff that is apparently going on everywhere else, but Earth is basically untouchable. So at this point, it's like, who's more religious, right? Is it the religions of the world that are religious? Or is it the geologists and the cosmologists who think that Earth, for some weird reason, has this mystical armor? It's crazy. All right, let's get on with the next part of this article. And I highly recommend going to listen to the first part, so obviously this part makes sense. All right. Part 2 of this article that I am reading from the Royal Society. It's on submergence of Europe and the Mediterranean. The author then describes how that portion of the rubble drift, which was not caught in fissures or hollows, was swept down the sides of the hills during upheaval of the land. Amongst the most illustrative instances of these is that on the slopes of Mount Genève near Semur. And sorry, I don't know if I'm saying these right, so just bear with me. This hill, which is 1,430 feet high, is capped by a characteristic oolite bed. And it is in the debris carried down from this bed that forms on the slopes a breccia containing similar remains to those of the fissures at Santene, together with the land shells and the flint flakes of human manufacture. Another such mass was cut through the railway to the east of Mentone, where the base of the limestone cliffs, in which are situated the noted Mentone bone caves, are covered by a breccia in which were found the remains of hyena, cave bear, and other animals, together with flints worked by man. Now this is in France, remember, so they're finding hyena in France. Alright, next section, Belgium. The author recognizes the rubble drift in angular debris termed by M. Dupont Aiguille à blocages, which partly masks, as with the Gower caves, some of the celebrated bone caves near Dinant. So there's basically all these bone caves all over Europe. It's crazy, and they were actually mined for energy at one point in time. Anyway. It forms a thin layer between the cave deposits and a deposit of the Stone Age, thus defining its clear geological position. It contains, when fronting the caves, the remains of a reindeer, ox, horse, etc., which has led to its being classed with the cave deposits. But the author thinks that those remains have been derived from the beds which it overlies and has partly denuded. Gibraltar. The Atlantic waves have left few traces of raised beaches and head on the western coasts of Spain and Portugal, but on the Rock of Gibraltar there are traces of several raised beaches covered in places by large angular rubble, or head. This rubble extends over the slopes of the black rock on both sides. Really quick recap. So this guy's basically discovering lots of beach areas way high up to where you really shouldn't be able to find any kind of remnant of a beach, basically. So that's why this is important. On the western side, it attains a thickness of 100 feet and is projected 550 yards seaward at an angle of 9 degrees. It is clearly not a talus, nor is it a cone of dejection. And just so everybody knows, a talus is a slope formed especially by an accumulation of rock debris. So basically a ton of rock debris coming down creates a talus. So that's what he's talking about. Sir Andrew Ramsay and Professor James Geikie referred to its origin to 2 periods of severe cold and snowslides. The objection to this is the great volume of the detritus, the size of some of the blocks, some being 12 feet in diameter, these are big boys, and the distance to which it is projected compared to the very limited snow collecting surface, 1,400 feet in height, and the small angle of the slope. The remarkable aciferous fissures of Gibraltar, which are placed by the authors between the 2 agglomerates or breccia, referred by them to different periods, contain remains of 3 species of felis, of hyena, of bear, rhinoceros, wild boar, ibex, ox, horse, deer, hare. The bones are, as usual, much broken and splintered, and none belonged to one entire skeleton. A human molar and some worked flint flakes were also found. So this is an interesting point, actually. So don't forget, if this water rushes up that quick, the reason why they are finding all of these scattered bones literally just compacted and shoved into these caves is because the action of the water has just absolutely decimated the carcass of the animal. There's no predation on the bones, they just shattered, which means the action and the energy of the water had to be high. I mean, this was no joke flood. This water was coming in quick, which is exactly what you would expect given what was causing the cataclysm. This entire situation was no joke, and it absolutely destroyed everything in its path. I mean, just imagine that. A mountain of water just rushing through the continent, quick enough to smash animals apart, rip rock around, throw it all over the place, and just crush mountains, and bury an entire landscape over 1,000+ feet of water. That is insane. But the evidence points exactly in that direction. And of course, our ancestors also corroborate the evidence. Alright, moving back onto the article. It has been suggested that the remains are those of animals that had lived and died on the rock, and were afterwards washed into the fissures by heavy rains. But this is difficult to conceive. And besides, there is the same incompatibility in the habits and resorts of the animals thus associated as in the other fissures before mentioned. The hyena, the Felidae, the text is a little smudged here. F-E-L-I-D, it's kind of smudged. E or A, I don't know. And bears might have frequented the dens and crags of the rock, but the deer, bovine, horse, and others could only have lived in the surrounding plains. And it has not been suggested that they were carried there by the carnivores. So basically, why do you find all of these animals that should never be in a cave? Why do you find just tons of them dead, shattered in a cave? A great and common danger alone could have driven together the animals of the plains and of the crags and caves. As the rock was upheaved in divergent currents swept down on both sides of the rock, the detritus of the limestone disintegrated by the previous long glacial cold, together with the scattered animal remains, and that the propelling force was great, and consequently the rise rapid, is shown by the distance to which the breccia extends from the base of the rock. The scale is different, and the materials are different, but in all essential respects the phenomena are analogous to those presented by the head at Brighton and at Sangate. There is the same restriction to local debris with blocks, the same absence of wear, the same traces of rude bedding, and the same occasional presence of mammalian remains. All this points to a common origin. Sicily. Traces of similar phenomena are shown to exist in Sardinia, Corsica, Italy, and the coast of Dalmatia. The remarkable caves of Sicily next arrest attention from the extraordinary quantity of bones of hippopotami belonging to hundreds of individuals. Yeah, they found tons of hippopotamus bones in Italy. Yeah, explain that one. And remember, these can't be that old. They were not finding like the way you would think a fossil embedded into a rock and it's whatever BS fossil thing they say, you know, the minerals replace the bone or whatever. No, they are bones of these creatures. Bones only last a certain amount of time. This stuff is relatively new, which were found in connection with them. 20 tons of these bones were shipped from the cave of San Siro near Palmero within the first 6 months of working. And they were so fresh that they were sent to Marseille for use in the sugar factories. See, they're even calling it out here. This is how easy and quickly ancient history is destroyed. These people found 20 tons, and this is their estimate at the time, of bones and all this animal matter shoved into these caves, and they were so fresh they could literally still use them in sugar factories. I mean, that's insane. What that proves is that this cataclysm did not happen 10,000, 20,000, 10 million years ago. This is relatively recent. Few thousand years at best. How could this bone breccia have been accumulated? No predaceous animals could have brought together such a collection, and though hyena lived at the time, they have left no traces of their presence nor marks of their teeth in this wonderful mass of bones. These have been classed with the contents of bone caves, but the author shows that there are objections to this. The only other suggestion made is that the bones are those of successive generations of hippopotami which went there to die. Okay, so basically what they're saying is hippopotami, they swam from Africa all the way up to Italy and died. That's literally what the mainstream suggests at this point in time. The only suggestion made is that the bones are those of successive generations of hippopotami which went there to die. I said that. But this is not the habit of the animal, and besides, the bones are those of animals of all ages, down to the fetus. Nor do the bones show any traces of weathering or of variable exposure. The author suggests an explanation founded on the local topographical features. The plain of Palmeros is encircled by an amphitheater of hills rising to the height of 2,000 to 3,000 feet and presenting mural precipices towards the plain. The caves are situated near the base of this escarpment, and at San Siro, the breccia not only faces the cave, but also extends to some distance in front and on the other side. When, therefore, the island was submerged, the animals in the plain of Palmero would naturally retreat as the waters advanced, deeper into the amphitheater of the hills until they found themselves embayed as in a seine, a net basically, with promontories running out to sea on either side, and a mural precipice in the front. As the area became more circumscribed, the animals must have been thronged together in vast multitudes, crushing into the more accessible caves and swarming over the ground at their entrance, until overtaken by the waters and destroyed. A few of the more agile animals may have escaped, for though the remains of deer, ox, bear, and felidae occur, they are exceedingly scarce. But the unwieldy hippopotami perished in hundreds. As the land afterwards emerged by intermittent stages, first the rocky debris, and finally large blocks from the sides of the hills were hurled down, crushing and smashing the bones, which are, with few exceptions, broken into thousands of fragments. The author accounts for the numbers of the hippopotami by the fact that after the formation of the raised beaches, there was, as he previously shown, a considerable elevation of the coast, which no doubt led, as in more Western Europe, to a large increase of the land area. Interesting. So that the plain of Palmero may then have been of great extent. So it's interesting that as this guy follows the evidence, the geological evidence, he's finding another way to prove that the entire Mediterranean dealt with some serious flood problems and land collapses. Now, ancient history is already filled with the Mediterranean being screwed over as far as landmass collapses, floods, etc. All kinds of bad stuff happened there. He's not mentioning any of that stuff, though. All he's doing is saying, hey, I'm looking at some of the geology, and this is what it's telling us. And this stuff, his evidence right here, literally lines up with everything that the ancient people of that area talk about. So what he's basically saying, though, or he's confirming, is that the area of the Mediterranean was once absolutely more land now, or back then, than it is now. So now we have, the Mediterranean Sea, etc., the Aegean Sea, that whole area. There wasn't initially any kind of a sea there a few thousand years ago. And the geological evidence, proves that here, but it also is correlated with our histories. Yeah, okay, moving on. Malta. The drift deposits of Malta present on the whole the same general features as those of Sicily, but owing to its peculiar population of dwarf elephants, with the small hippopotamus, and the absence of other large quaternary mammalia, the faunal remains have a distinct local coloring. They indicate that, like the Channel Islands, Malta had been long isolated before the spread of the rubble drift, but nevertheless, it is evident that it did not escape the catastrophe which affected the adjacent lands. On the south side of the island, escaped rocks rise abruptly to the height of 200 to 300 feet. The lower part of these slopes is covered by a consolidated red breccia consisting of angular fragments of the local rocks, mixed with the red earth which covers the hilltops, and containing in places remains of the pygmy elephant. The author takes this breccia to be the representative of the head at the Brighton and Sangate, only that in this instance the height of the escarpment has prevented its being entirely swamped, as are the old cliffs at those places. It resembles closely the breccia on the Mentone slopes. It is probable that this island, no part of which exceeds a height of 800 feet, was entirely submerged, for not a single species, nor even one genus of its quaternary mammalia are now found living on the island, nor did any of its peculiar forms pass to the adjacent lands. Basically, it was exterminatus. It was just wiped clean, the entire island. Greece. The surface deposits of Turkey and southern Russia are, seemingly, in general accordance with the views here expressed. The rubble beds are, however, better developed in Greece and are there associated with an osseous breccia. This angular rubble forms great sheets extending to the shore, where they are worn back and form cliffs 30 to 40 feet high, whilst the present torrents cut through and carry down this drift, spreading it out on the coast in the form of cones of dejection, which often becomes re-cemented like older breccia. On the adjacent island of Serigo, vociferous fissures, said to contain human remains, occur on the summit of an isolated flat-topped hill. In Crete, there are, in places, immense accumulations of angular detritus, and at one spot, a raised beach is overlaid by a calcareous breccia analogous to the head of the coasts of the Channel. In the island of Rhodes is a breccia which is said not to be distinguishable from that of Greece. Asia Minor. M. de Chitatitate Chief says that quaternary deposits are much less common in Asia Minor than in Europe, and that there are detrital deposits of local origin on the slopes of the hills which may be quaternary or modern, and the remarks on the absence of organic remains in these superficial drifts. A raised beach, 5 to 30 feet above present sea level, surrounds Cyprus, but it does not appear to be accompanied by a head, though a sandy bed, like Los, overlies it in places. Nor is there any record of vociferous breccia or fissures. This may be owing to the submergence here having been small. It's interesting to see that we can actually maybe even track the destruction level as it would have crossed the continent by who's affected by what, when, and how. Yeah, that's something to think about. On the coast of Palestine, raised beaches range up to the height of 220 feet, but the other cannot find any record of an overlying rubble or head. Traces of a bone breccia of uncertain relations have, however, been found near Beirut, and detrital deposits are alluded to, but the only bone cave described appears to be of Neolithic age. No ossiferous fissures nor remains of quaternary mammalia have been noticed. The author concludes that the submergence of the district, if any, must have been small, but of its extension further eastward he has no means of judging, so he doesn't have the information for that. We actually have more stuff. I'll go into that later on a different show. Monsieur Le Latet states that stone implements of the Paleolithic type have been found on the surface near Bethlehem and in some other places. Really quick on when stone tools are found. One of the problems we have with mainstream science, or mainstream history, well, science I guess as well, is whenever we find like a stone tool, we instantly ascribe that to a caveman. So for dating purposes, when they find a stone tool, it's instantly thrown back like 20,000 years, because only cavemen ever used stone tools, and they act as if no other period in time has any other human used any kind of a stone tool. So that's obviously garbage. Of course, stone tools are still used even to this day. So think about it like this. Let's say 1,000 years from now, some archaeologist finds a pumice stone that you use to clean your toilet or something, right? Well, that archaeologist, if they go by today's methodology, they would be like, well, look at this stone. These people must have been using this stone to carve their name in a rock 10 million years ago, because, you know, it's ridiculous. We have computers, we're doing all this crazy stuff right now, and yet we will still use a pumice stone as a tool of useful, all kinds of useful stuff, right? So the mainstream always looks at any kind of stone implement as some sort of caveman thing. And of course, everybody's also fallen into this hole as well. So my advice to you, don't fall into that. If you hear somebody talking about stone tools or that stone tools were found, don't jump to the caveman conclusion. right? So if you were here's another example. If you were part of a catastrophism, right? Something came through, wiped out everything. You're going to actually find that probably some stone implements that you yourself can create on the fly are going to be handy and helpful. Even though you fully understand the concept of like the internet, computers, flying, etc., you might still end up having to pick up that flint and carving off that flint to start a fire, right? Basically, stone is useful no matter what period of time you exist in. So don't just discount stone tools as cave people stuff. North Africa. The coast of North Africa presents confirmatory evidence. It is fringed by raised beaches. One in particular, 10 to 40 feet above the sea level, is very consistent. Ossiferous fissures are met with on the coast of Tetouan, Oran, and other places in Algeria. They present the same characters and contain the remains of similar animals as those at Nice and Gibraltar. The fissures do not, however, seem to extend beyond Algeria, for none have been recorded in the province of Constantine, though there is a breccia which is suggestive of a rubble drift. Eastward of Tunis, the country has been described as consisting of rolling hills of Cretaceous rocks in a sea of quaternary drift, which from the account of it closely resembles a rubble drift, but osseous breccias and fissures seem absent. It would appear, therefore, that as on the north shores of the Mediterranean, there was a decrease in the depth of submergence as we proceed from west to east. Egypt. It may be, in fact, a question whether the submergence extended in this direction beyond the Libyan desert. The escarped limestone hills and long lines of quarries in Egypt show no ossiferous fissures, nor does there seem to be any rubble drift overlaying the fluviatile terraces of the Nile, or underlying the river alluvium. Nevertheless, there is reason to believe the Paleolithic man did exist there, for flint implements of the same type as those of Thames and Somme valleys have been found, but they were all on the surface, and none are from any deposit of well-ascertained quaternary age. See, every time they find a piece of stone, it's a cave dude. Paleolithic. It may further be noticed that several of the animals which disappeared with the rubble drift in the more western districts, such as lion, panther, spotted hyena, hippopotamus, African elephant, Kafir cat, survived in the Nile Valley to historic times. Wow, that's kind of cool. In conclusion, the author deals with certain objections which he foresees may be raised to the proposed hypothesis, especially that respecting the absence of marine remains on the submerged lands. Now that is a very interesting problem. We have water raising up, but it's not ocean water apparently, or any kind of marine. This, however, he attributes to the short duration of the submergence, which neither allowed time for ordinary marine sedimentation, nor for the migration and establishment of a marine fauna on the submerged area, and also to the turbid condition of the waters. Now that's fair. So if it happens really quick, my question would be this. If hypothetically, let's just say we threw a wall of water over a continent today, what would we expect to see? I guess we could go and we could look at current day tsunamis. Do current day tsunamis that we deal with, that's a one day sort of situation. It's an unfortunate situation, but we do have modern evidence today of large scale water covering a landmass, right? A chunk of a landmass. How much of the sea life remains in the historical zeitgeist there in the geology? That's a good question, right? We can actually go see this. And the reality is, and I went and looked this up, the reality is it gets cleaned up pretty quick, right? It's only a very surface level of any sort of sea life that would have been there anyway, and that stuff is instantly predated on. And that stuff is also washed back out to sea anyway. So if we're wondering why it didn't leave tons of marine life and marine evidence, I mean, that's why. If it happened really quick, and it happens quick enough to where, as they just said, you can't do any sedimentation, it's just a quick surface level cleaning really fast, right? That water just rushes over the continent, then leaves same day. How much of it would it really leave? Not much, if any. Well, it would leave some, but how quickly would the some that was there, that was left over, how quickly would that be scrubbed due to just basic nature taking its course, right? I mean, as you can see, humans have literally wiped out a lot of the evidence that used to exist for this en masse. For example, we quarry out all of these dead animals and everything for energy back in the day. I don't know if it's still done today. I doubt it, because it's probably all gone. But, a couple hundred years ago, they were literally using these dead animals shoved in these fissures as an energy source. So we know that we can destroy evidence of things pretty dang quickly. Yeah, so I wonder if that's why, so that's why we wouldn't see it, because it happens pretty quick. And so that would lend itself to not leaving behind any marine evidence. All right. To the objections based on uniformitarian grounds to the rate of upheaval, he does not attach so much weight, as it seems to him that uniformity of energy in dealing with a body like the globe cannot be admitted. Yeah. The question should be judged by the evidence and facts, and not decided by an uncertain postulate. Now, that's a whole other ball of wax, but that's okay, yeah. The facts, on the other hand, show that all the phases of the rubble drift are such as may be due to the agency of a common cause. Briefly, whether it be the head over the raised beaches, the osseous breccia on the slopes, or the ossiferous fissures, they all present a complete absence of that wear which must result from a river, sea, or ice action, basically water moving over a nice long period of time. All the materials are of local origin, while all the fauna remains of these, and none of the section of the loess are such in as might come from the wreck of a land surface, and a land surface only. The bones of the animals have evidently been subjected to considerable but not lasting violence, for they are broken and splintered, yet not worn. And though the remains are associated together in, as it were, a common grave, it is impossible to suppose that under the ordinary conditions of animal existence, such dissimilar orders could have been associated in life, nor as the bones are free from all traces of gnawing. There is no predation on any of these bones. Could those remains have been collected and left by beasts of prey? So basically, there's no way that a horse and a lion were chilling in a cave together living happily, right? And then there's also no evidence that all of these animals that died were killed by a carnivore. These concurrent conditions, together with the mode of distribution of the rubble drift from many independent centers, seem to the author, howsoever startling may be the conclusion, to be only explicable upon the hypothesis of a widespread and short submergence. Another consequence the author draws from the position of the rubble drift, and one that confirms a conclusion which he had drawn from very different data, is that it affords grounds to believe that in estimating the time elapsed since the so-called post-glacial period, instead of a measure of 80,000 to 100,000 years, one of 10,000 to 12,000 years would be a closer approximation. Seeing these, they're still afraid to move it up even closer. For it will have been observed that, where present, only a few feet of that particular drift separates the deposits of the Quaternary Age from those of the newer Stone or Neolithic Age, and that nowhere have there been found between the two any sedimentary beds representing the work of any long period of time. Further, the surface configuration has remained since then comparatively unaltered. So basically, this would have been the last major cataclysm we would have seen. So I wonder if this would have been the Mars. I don't know if this would have been the Mars event or the Venus event. Nevertheless, the author is fully alive to the difficulties attendant upon the hypothesis he ventures to put forward. Some of these concern naturalists rather than geologists, and the opportunity for their discussion has not hitherto arisen. He invites younger geologists to follow up the inquiry and submits that, so far as the actual phenomena are concerned, the hypothesis satisfies, on the whole, all the more important conditions of the problem. Now, this is good science. This guy did exactly what we should do. You take the evidence, you simply follow it, and then you present it, and then you open it up for discussion and more scientific evidence. This article is a perfect example of how we need to do things. So take this information for what it is. We'll use it in future videos to support other conclusions that further prove more catastrophism on the planet.